Well, hey, everybody, it's Hal Weatherman, president of the Electoral Education Foundation, EEF, as we call it. EEF is a 501c3 nonprofit that we started, I guess, about 2 years ago, dedicated to bringing transparency to the North Carolina voting system. And we do ongoing research around the year, not just during election season, monitoring the North Carolina voter file. I'm joined here today with Major Dave, Vice President of Research for EEF. Major Dave, how are you?
I'm doing just fine, Hal. Working like crazy.
I know you are. I know you are. So Major Dave and I have been talking for quite some time about a project that we haven't been overly public about. Wanted to shed some light on that today, public. It's one of our major research projects that's been going on, and Major Dave has done an amazing job of tracking down it's a complicated issue, and we're going to share it today in layman's terms as best we can. But Major Dave, why don't you, it has to do with NCID numbers and how they're issued, and why don't you tell us a little bit about the project you're working on, and then we'll break it down into its component parts.
Well, just to quickly review, every voter in North Carolina has two voter identification numbers. One, the NCID you mentioned, is issued by the state of North Carolina. That number should never change for a voter once they are registered. Then in your county issues you a county ID number. But if you move from one county to the other, the new county will give you a new county ID number, but your state number should stay the same. And that is how your voter history follows you from one county to another. Now, we look at these records, and they're updated every Saturday morning by the state of North Carolina. And you can go online to the State Board of Elections website, download the files, and then you can compare it from one week to the next. And that's what we've been doing now for the last 18 months. We've been looking at each of these weekly files, which records show up as new, which ones disappear. Now, the State Board has told us that when a voter goes from active to inactive to removed over time because they don't vote, don't respond to mailings, they become removed. Now, the record is still there. The status says removed, so we know they're no longer an eligible voter. After 10 years and no activity, they redact those records from the weekly file just to keep it from getting too large. And we understand that. We're told these records are still in the main database. They just aren't reported any longer. And so we've been taking a look at how many of these records disappear. And I use that term disappear, redacted, whatever they want to say. They're just no longer in that weekly report. How in the last 18 months, we've identified, and as you can see here in this chart, 672,114 voter records have simply vanished. They're gone. So we broke it down by status. What status was this voter's record in at the time it disappeared? And out of that, there are only 216,000 that were actually in a removed status and had not voted in the last two general elections. 40,793 were active voters, and their record is there one week, it's not there the next. Why can this be? These are the types of questions that we say don't prove fraud, but these are the weaknesses in the system that fraud needs to exist. And of those 40,000, 34 had a verified address. So some interaction between the county board and the voter said, yes, this is the right person, and they live where they say they live.
So, Major Dave, just to make sure that we don't lose anybody, because it does get complicated. And again, an NCID number, for all intents and purposes, is actually just a code put on a voter to protect the confidentiality of the voter in the event that somehow their ballot became public record. You couldn't see the name of the voter and who they voted for. It would be an NCID number, right? And so one of the things that we have been pushing for legislatively with the General Assembly has been to mandate what we would call the sequential and the chronological issuing of NCID numbers. In other words, to make sure the NCID numbers are issued in a transparent chronological sequence.
Right.
And what you're saying is that our research is finding that there are batches of NCID numbers that are not being issued sequentially.
Right.
And when you do the research, you find out that they're disappearing from the record on the weekly updates.
Right.
And then sometimes they're then reappearing at a later date, and then
Right.
they're out of chronological order.
Right.
Does that make sense? Am I saying that
Right.
correctly?
Yes. And when these records reappear, these numbers that we are finding showing up are NCID numbers that were originally issued to a voter, in some cases as much as 20 years ago. And the unique thing about these new records, Hal, these people never voted. Or if the few that did vote, voted either in the 2008 or 2012 general election. Never before, never since. And now 20 some years later, their record shows up with a current registration date, sometimes even in a different county. But so we have this multiple issue of some group of records disappearing and then others reappearing later. And when you can make a number come and go like that, it's difficult to have confidence in the accuracy of the rolls. So back on June 29th, we wrote to the State Board of Elections. We raised the question of the disappearing numbers and asked them to explain it, because we knew what they had told us about the 10-year limit. And then we waited. August 29th, 60 days later, I write back. I haven't heard anything. What's your response? Oh, it's in our legal department being reviewed. I kicked it to the top of their inbox. We'll try to get something to you. So now, today, October 2nd, it's been more than 90 days. And we do like to give the state board a chance to respond to these questions first before we go public. But after 90 days, we think enough is enough. It's time for us to put the question out there. We need to let the people know. We need to let the legislators know, because obviously this cannot continue to happen. But there's one other little thing. I'm going to show you this little chart right here. This shows a group of records from Cumberland County. And if you look in column G, the records are highlighted in blue. You can see those NCID numbers are in exact sequence: 147, 148, 49, 50, etc. But if you look next to it in column F, under the voter registration number, and that's the number issued by the county, you see they're skipping numbers. It jumps from 902 to 904, then it jumps from 910 to 912. Why are the county numbers not in exact sequence as well? We don't know. But these are the kinds of questions that we need to be asking the state board and forcing them to respond to us. The other thing, if you look in column H on the registration date, they are not in sequence. It's saying me that a person who registered on February 13th got their number after somebody who registered on February 23rd, 10 days later. Now, we do know there are 8 state agencies that can register people to vote, and they do it all on paper. DMV is the only state agency that's online and does it immediately. But if you go to the Wildlife Commission to get a hunting license, they're going to ask you, do you want to register to vote? They do those in paper. They bundle them up once a month, and send them in. So we have to know that there is a reason that these numbers won't be in exact chronological sequence. But what we're seeing is a number showing up here, but the registration date has been backdated by months or years. We need to have a means for the people at the county level, because with technology being what it is, we have people at the county level now monitoring their voter records in their county every Saturday. They don't have a specific method of taking this to their county board and getting answers. And we need to put that mechanism into the system so that we can hold the system accountable at every level.
I mean, I think it's amazing research you've done. We're raising more questions than we have answers for. We willfully acknowledge that. From my standpoint, it's almost like a chain of custody issue.
Yes.
Right. The system itself should be openly transparent. And if a person is properly registered to vote, it should be public record, and we should be able to see it at any one time.
Right.
For those NCID numbers, which again are in effect voters, just coded voters,
right,
for them to be able to disappear from public scrutiny and then at a later date reappear, begs the question, why? Where
Yeah.
did they go? What
Right.
was done to the record while they were gone? I mean, these are the suspicious things that people would start to ask.
Right.
And so we're just trying to put transparency. And again, EEF has been pushing for a legislative solution on this, which would just mandate that all the records, all the NCID numbers would be mandated by law to be issued in sequential and chronological order. Because if that were to take place, right, we would not be having these conversations. There would be transparency. People, NCID numbers would not be appearing and reappearing. They would just always be. They would
Right.
always be there, and they would be in a systematic, very transparent fashion. So I think you've done great research. Again, we don't have the answers yet. We willfully acknowledge that, but we will stay on behalf of EEF, on behalf of the people that we represent. We will continue putting pressure on the State Board of Elections to give us an answer. And whatever the answer is, we'll report it. If there is a legitimate reason for this, we will report that and give them credit for it. But we need to absolutely put transparency back in the system. And this is one of the major things at EEF that we see that maybe the average person would not understand the significance of, right? But I guess the potential for fraud is fairly huge there. You're right. If somebody would explain with no allegations, just what is the potential for fraud by making NCID numbers disappear and reappear at your day.
Well, and how one of the reasons we went 18 full months with this is because we wanted to eliminate the possibility that this was some kind of clerical error in entering a registration date. We wanted to show that this was happening with regularity over time. And it was happening not just in the big counties, but the small counties as well. And it is true. We find the same thing in all 100 counties. So this has been going on for a long time. And when you think about it, with 2,700 precincts in the state, if you were wanting to fudge an election result, if you moved 5 votes per precinct, that's over 13,000 vote swing you could make in a statewide race. That's roughly the margin that Josh Stein won under Jim O'Neill for Attorney General in 2020, and it's roughly the margin that Roy Cooper beat Pat McCrory by in 2016. Now, we're not saying those votes are fraudulent, but we're saying that's how little you have to do in each county to swing a statewide election that far.
Which is why we need transparency all the way down to the county level. And one way to do that would be for the state board to issue the NCID numbers in chronological and sequential order. It's a very common fix. And by the way, just to acknowledge, as you said, there are 8 agencies where you can register to vote. Only one of them is online.
Right.
And so, perhaps there is some kind of lag. There is some kind of delay as they're batching once a month and turning in their stuff. We acknowledge that. However, it doesn't really explain that some of these records are backdated in some instances years, not months, but years ago, right?
Yeah.
And so one potential legislative solution, not only to mandate the NCID numbers are put in sequential and chronological order, but would be to make the technological upgrades. Right. If we're going to continue issuing NCID numbers through multiple state agencies, mandate that they're all online and provide the resources so that it's instantaneous. And by the way, why aren't we doing that? Right. It only seems reasonable that we would do that in today's day and age. But
how many of the things that we find could be detected by changes to the existing software to build these audits into the system as the data is being entered. In other words, it could be a parameter that if the registration date is more than 30 days old, it requires maybe a supervisor's input or click to that record saying, yes, this is legitimate, this is valid. And we're hoping that what we do here at the EEF actually helps the State Board of Elections build a better mousetrap. That's what we're trying to do.
Exactly. If it's out of chronological order or sequential order by more than 30 days, it automatically triggers a red flag that says, hey, there's got to be an explanation for this provided. Right.
And the other thing we need to determine too is when these records disappear from that weekly file, is this done by the state or is it the county redacting these records? we need to ask them that, and we have asked, because that is critical, because the counties own their records. They are the masters of their election in that county. And the state board has limited authority to change any voter's data on behalf of that county.
Great. If I were a county elections, a board of elections director,
Yes,
I would be asking these questions of my
exactly.
state board, right? Because I'm not going to maintain a fiduciary and a legal um, responsibility
Right.
over something that in effect someone else could change underneath me without my knowledge, right? And so it kind of
Exactly.
defies logic. They're not, and it could be they just don't know. We don't
And,
know.
and we want the viewers to understand, unlike some of the other election integrity groups out there, this research is not based on algorithms or mathematical computations. This is looking at a list of voters one week, a list of voters the next week. Why is it there one week? It's not there the next. We can put a voter's name and address and data with every one of those 672,000 records that disappeared. We can put a voter's name and address with every one of these new records showing up. We don't even know if they're real people.
Right.
If somebody is fabricating records, this is just how easy it is for them to make a voter appear and then disappear. And if you can change the voter's record, you can change their voter history record.
Right.
You can have a person vote in 2010 and yet it'll not show up today that they ever cast a ballot if it was a fraudulent entry. Somebody has access to do this. And that's why finding, whether it's the state level, the county level, we can dig down and eventually hold somebody accountable.
That's exactly right. Ultimately, that is the goal of EEF, right? Transparency
Yes,
in the system and accountability. And the accountability, by the way, is not to us. The accountability is to the people. It's to the
exactly.
people of
Yeah.
North Carolina. And so, listen, we'll stop there. We'll just simply say that thank you for watching. If you find this interesting and if you'd like to know more, as soon as we do have an update from the state board on the questions asked by Major Dave's research, we will share it. Good, bad, or otherwise, we will share it. And if it's incomplete, we'll share it. And we will stay on this until we're given an answer. But Major Dave, I just want to thank you. It is 18 months and counting worth of research, and appreciate what you're doing and the transparency you're trying to bring to the system.
Yeah,
So
recently it goes up 2 to 3,000 additional records disappearing every month.
very good. Well, if you like what you've watched today, reminder: EEF is a donation-supported entity, 501c3 nonprofit. Um, share our video with people of like mind, people that have a concern about election integrity. And as always, feel free to contact either one of us with any questions directly, and we're happy to help with any election integrity issues. So, on behalf of EEF, I'm Hal Weatherman. This is Major Dave, and we thank y'all for watching.